Welcome to another episode of the Cannabis Review. My name is Owen Long. Thanks everybody for watching all the episodes so far. We've got an absolute great show for you today. Our guest on the show today is Mitchell Osak. He is the CEO of Quanta Consulting Inc. And anybody in the industry is going to know this man's name. He's one of the peers of the industry. How are you doing, Mitchell?
I'm doing great, Owen. Thank you for having me on.
You're very welcome. Thank you for joining us. I think I'm just going to jump into things and maybe give somebody a little bit of background as to how you got into the cannabis industry and kind of where you started and how you got to where you are now, if you want to fill in the viewers a little bit on that.
Sure, thank you. I started in the Canadian legal cannabis industry in 2015 by doing some consulting work for, at the time, a nascent cannabis industry association, which at the time was made up of only 32 licensed producers, but many of the names that many of your listeners will know: Canopy, Aurora, Afrio, Kronos. So I started working for that small group, and from that first couple of projects, it blossomed into working for governments, extractors, retailers, as well as global providers of cannabis.
Okay, so a man with a wealth of experience and knowledge for the viewers to be able to listen up closely now during this episode. I'm going to jump straight into the first topic, and it's pretty much the big news at the moment that everybody's been going on about: the removal of cannabis from Schedule 4. Is this a big a deal as people are making it out to be? Does it change much in terms of the industry for the companies that are in it? What are your thoughts on what happened yesterday?
Well, it's like Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities. It's the best of times and the worst of times. So if one believes that symbolism is important, yes, it was a very important decision, because it basically took what was considered a harmful narcotic drug, and the UN recognized that it now has medicinal purposes. So symbolically, it's taken off of the bad list and it's put on the benign list. But the reality of what's happened is that it has not given any country a technical mandate to come out with a legal cannabis program. Now, my country, Canada, as well as Uruguay and a couple of others like Israel, have done it, but the UN has not given a bright green light for any country to go out and do this. So places like Canada are still technically offside UN policies and rules.
Okay, so as we both, I think, can agree on this, that it's great news, it moves the industry forward, but it by no means opens the floodgates as what some people seem to be going on, like on social media.
Yeah, absolutely. Countries are not going to change their policies because of what the UN just voted on. And by the way, it was a very slight vote, 27 to 25 in favor. So not a huge global mandate.
Yeah, and one abstention, I think, in the whole vote as well. So very, very close indeed. It probably bring me on to the next topic I'd like to talk about. Is there's all this hullabaloo happening here in Europe. Canada were the first industry to or first country to get into this industry properly. What is it that Europe can learn from Canada and the information that you guys can bestow on the global industry?
Well, there's a lot of good that's come out of Canada regarding cannabis policy and cannabis market development. There's been a lot of bad as well, but essentially the good is a common regulatory framework across an entire country. So unlike the United States, where you have a patchwork of different regulations and legalizations by state, and many states, cannabis is still illegal, including medically. In Canada, you have one common policy that covers an entire country and about 35 million people. That regulatory framework, while very restrictive in some ways, like we don't allow cannabis companies to market or brand in any particular way, there is a common set of rules that ensure safety, proper consumption, consumer education, and the elimination of the black market. So, so far in Canada, we have a burgeoning industry, although it has its challenges. No one has died. We have underage use staying consistent to where it was before. And we have a plethora of new products that are being introduced all the time. And a market now, a legal market, which is approaching $3.5 billion Canadian in size. So all of those things are very positive. There are things that Europe can improve on. For example, around messaging of products and allowing, various THC contents and things like beverages, but edibles. But all in all, I would rate it a sort of a B grade. But we are working to improve it in 2021. And hopefully when the EU gets its act together, they'll adopt a new and improved Canadian regulatory regime.
Okay. One question I've always wanted to ask a Canadian expert. At the very start of your industry, it was you had to have a fully integrated company. Am I correct in saying that?
Yes.
Do you think the fully integrated model was a success, or are the free markets where the broker companies are allowed to compete is a far more sustainable model for the industry? Because I think if you look at it, that's one of the reasons the American model does so well, that there's the competition there, the real true brands are going to come to the fore, whereas if you've got just 2 or 3 integrated companies, it kind of dilutes the market and has a lack of top class products at a great price point for the consumer.
You're absolutely right, Owen. The whole idea of having integrated products and value chains early on was an answer to a couple of fundamental issues. One is, how do you ensure like consistency of product throughout the value chain? How do you ensure you have enough, flower to do extraction and so on and so forth? So the decision of a lot of these Canadian companies was driven by a lot of considerations, one of which was the best strategy to go to market. But as the Canadian market matures, and now you have a variety of different producers and a variety of different companies serving it, the best model is not to be vertically integrated anymore. And in a lot of cases, it actually is a hindrance because it leads to a lack of focus and a lot of wasted capital all throughout the value chain. So what you're starting to see in the Canadian cannabis industry is an evolution towards a consumer packaged goods or a big pharma kind of business model where cannabis companies do certain things like cultivation or extraction or creating brands, and they outsource a lot of those other activities to specialists who just focus on that particular activity.
Okay, excellent. And another thing that I'd actually like to get your opinion on is you had Cannabis 2.0 happened there last December in Canada with the introduction of edibles and infused beverages. In America, it was kind of the complete opposite. It was free reign. You had products that had 500 milligrams in one cookie that were pretty much flooring people, and they brought it back to limited at 10 milligrams or 20 milligrams. I don't know which it is per product. Do you think, let's say for the Irish politicians who might watch this show and the people who may be in charge, that introducing edibles and infused beverages from the very start with a regulated quantity is the smart way to go, as opposed to bringing it on in the second phase? Or do you think the second phase is the more nuanced approach?
The Canadian market evolved the way it did because the government was basically the Canadian government was writing its own playbook at the time. There was no regulatory model anywhere that, again, across an entire country on a federal basis that showed the ideal path to legalizing these products. So Canadians, as Canadians do, adopted a very, deliberate step-by-step process to legalizing products. Okay, the U.S., did it a little bit differently, and the reality is the U.S. model didn't lead to much higher consumption among groups of people who are not legal to consume and so on and so forth. So I think Irish politicians, if they had to choose between the Canadian model and the American model, they ought to choose the American model, because the reality is that edibles are a very safe way of consuming this product. A lot of people don't want to smoke cannabis, certainly in North America. They can't smoke for a variety of health reasons. So consuming an edible is an ideal, easy way for many people to participate and enjoy the product. What we've seen in the United States is, again, a wide diversity of products being introduced. Many of them have ultra high levels of THC, which I'm not sure I would regulate and allow very early on because of the risks of, senior citizens or underage kids taking, chocolate bars with 100 milligrams of THC. But the reality is that these products can be consumed safely within an American model. Canada went a little slow; they had to do it. But what you're seeing right now is a huge introduction of a variety of different formats and sizes and varieties of topicals and tinctures. And no one is dying. People are consuming these products, and they're slowly gaining traction among consumers and improving in quality as well as price.
Okay, excellent. So that's been highly informative answers there to that question, which leads me on to our last topic, topic three, the race for global cannabis. What are the Canadian companies doing to position themselves to be those dominant brands worldwide? And do you see Europe being as big a market as people make it out to be, or Asia, Africa? Are they going to surpass it?
Okay, that is a big question, and I'm going to try and unpack it in chunks. So, Canadian companies very early on, many of them recognize Canada is a big legal market, but it's only 35 million people. And if we compare that to the size of the United States or the EU, we're still a relatively small market. So, many Canadian licensed producers from early on look to global markets. One is a destination for their production, and number two is a way to support their sky high public market valuations. So what you've seen is Canopy, Aurora, Afria, very aggressively try and move into Europe, move into South America, and in some cases move into places in Africa like Lesotho. The reality has been less than ideal for these Canadian companies because, the truth is you need a lot more money to compete effectively in places like Europe and the EU. And the reason for that is many of these Canadian companies didn't really understand what they were getting themselves into. For example, they underestimated EU GMP certification to sell your product in Germany. GMP is good manufacturing practices. That kind of regulation takes a long time to achieve in Canada. You have to retool some of your growing facilities. So Canadian companies spent a lot of time sitting around waiting to get that kind of certification. Some of them have already got it and they're already selling into Germany. But the reality is it is hard work and it takes a lot of learning to penetrate some of these markets, which on the surface look so big and promising, but in reality are very difficult. And I don't have to tell you, Owen, how complex the regulatory patchwork is in the EU, Germany compared to Great Britain, compared to Italy, and so on and so forth in Holland. So Canadian companies have underestimated the challenge. They've underestimated the time it takes. And at the same time, we've seen rapid developments in new markets like Israel that have quickly gone legal and have surpassed the size of the German market from a medical cannabis perspective. So the difficulty of Canadians as well as Europeans in keeping abreast of all the sort of the market moves and the legalizations around the world, it is a very, very tall order. So I've worked with a lot of Canadian LPs, and a lot of what I'm telling them is you've got to decide to double down and focus on certain markets and ignore others. So maybe competing in Latin America and the Caribbean and Africa and Israel and Germany and Italy isn't the best strategy when you continue to lose money in your home country. And it's time to, double down and focus on specific markets. But it's going to take a long time for the global cannabis market to shake out and to see where the real opportunity is today versus what companies are moving quickly, but countries rather moving quickly, but also moving sideways. And Great Britain is an example of a technically legal CBD-based market that has been moving sideways for a couple of years now.
Yeah, no, and I think that's what we're hoping here in Ireland, that we're positioned as one of the entry points for the North American companies who try to go into Europe, that we've got the skilled workforce, the English-speaking country, we've got that incentivized tax rate here, which all of Google and Apple and the rest of the big software firms seem to love. So I don't see why it'll be any different with the cannabis companies.
It likely won't, because what a lot of people are beginning to realize in the cannabis industry is the importance of human capital. A couple of years ago, it was all about funded capacity. And how big was your greenhouse compared to mine? Well, what we have now is, overbuilt capacity and, too many products and so on and so forth. And what we need in this industry now is talent, is an educated workforce and people who understand the tobacco industry, the beverage alcohol industry, the pharma industry, the consumer packaged goods industry, and where are those people located? And wherever they're located, and you have a strong professional services community and a strong educational system to produce qualified and motivated workers, that's where Canadian and American cannabis companies will go. And if the tech industry and the banking industry is a good example, Ireland will be a big destination for that, as well as the fact that we share the same language, and my favorite author, Oscar Wilde.
Wow. Oscar Wilde is a great author to have
And
as your
James
favorite.
Joyce, by the way.
Yeah, and we'll also have Brexit happening, which means we'll be the only English-speaking country left in the EU. So, yeah, I think there's a number of positives ahead for Ireland and the cannabis industry in the years to come.
Right.
I'm going to finish off with something a little bit off the conversation we've had so far, and I know it's something you're consulting on at the moment, which is psychedelics.
Mm-hmm.
How excited are you about this space, and do you see this space ramping up in a fifth of the time it took the cannabis industry?
Yeah. So again, another dichotomy for me. I'm super excited about the emergence of the psychedelics industry. For the most part, because it will be transformational in terms of how we treat mental health issues and so on and so forth. And when I mean transformational, I'm talking about hundreds of millions of people around the world and over $1 trillion in healthcare spend around treating these conditions and not curing them. So that's super exciting. And beyond what cannabis was, which was just the legalization of an existing activity that had been going on for thousands of years, psychedelics is a true renaissance. So it's hard not to be excited about that as a human being. That kind of promise has translated into hundreds of millions of dollars of investment into new psychedelic startups. And many of those are based in Canada, some are based in the EU, some are based in the United States. The downside of a lot of these things is that this is a back to the future moment for us. And that is, if you look back to where cannabis was, and certainly in Canada or in the United States in 2014, 2015, you saw a lot of hype. You saw a lot of capital going into this industry without a clear idea about how companies are going to make money. How long is it going to take them to build their greenhouses and to go through their trials? How long will it take the stigma around these products to evaporate? So we're seeing the same thing in psychedelics right now. And I'm concerned because you've got billion-dollar market caps of some psychedelic companies right now, where their quickest path to revenue is upwards of 3 to 5 years out. So I'm worried that the industry is getting hyped too fast, too quickly. It's getting too big from a market cap perspective. And then all of a sudden, when something bad happens, and something bad always will happen in one of these trials in one of these companies, the entire industry is going to come crashing down again, and it's going to set it back another year or 2 years from a capital infusion perspective, because people are fickle, and the psychedelic industry has, for the most part, attracted a lot of what's called retail investors and early cannabis investors that are quickly in and quickly out. So, over the medium term, I'm very bullish on psychedelics from a financial perspective, but in the short term, it's very volatile, very choppy, and very risky. At the same time, cannabis has gone through that choppy and risky time, and we're starting to see cannabis starting to emerge as a mature company with steadily rising operating results, profits, and market cap. So psychedelics is literally one generation behind. I just hope it quickly gets through this phase and gets to a mature, more responsible size of where cannabis is quickly going to.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, definitely an exciting space to be watching for the future. I can't thank you enough for coming on, Mitchell. It's been hugely informative. This has been one of my favorite episodes to date. It's been a great conversation. I hope you have a great Christmas, and hopefully we'll talk to you again in the new year at some stage.
Thank you, Owens. Be well, and I wish all the best to all my Irish friends this holiday.
Thank you very much. Stay in touch. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye. Cheers.